Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and what I'm doing in this video is a new Intro to React series. The reason I wanted to do this new Intro to React series is because since the last couple of different React series I created, I've created my own little template with React. The benefits is it gives you sort of the best of both worlds in the sense that there's two ways you generally start learning React. You create it from scratch where you use like script tags and you have to do everything in one file, or you use like Create React App. The problem with Create React App is that every Create React App is about over 100 megs of files, and it takes about like 5 minutes to get set up. So yeah, in this one with my template, it works like Create React App, but it's much smaller in size, perfect for learning React because it doesn't have all the other bells and whistles regarding testing and all this stuff that most people don't use. So you're not using up all that bloat, at least for learning purposes. Okay, so let's just do our setup of a React project. So I have a new folder called React here, where I'm going to be doing different React projects for learning purposes, and I'm going to hit a new folder. We're going to call this Project 1. Actually, I'm not even going to do that. Reason being is that I'm going to do this using my template maker. So long as you have to have Node installed, so that's Node.js, as long as you have Node installed, you should be good to do this. You're going to type in the command npx. npx is a command in Node that allows you to run a command one time without having to download the whole library. Okay, so you're going to type in npx Merced-Reactor. That's my little React project builder. Merced-Reactor, then the name of your project, so we'll call it Project 1. Okay, and then you're going to type in JS, which means the JavaScript template. If you type in TS, it'll do the TypeScript template, which I'm not going to be going over, so don't do that one. Okay, npx Merced-Reactor Project 1 JS. I hit that, and it's going to build my project, and project is built. See, like that's quick. Like if you did Merced-Reactor, if you did Create React App, that would have taken like 5-6 minutes. If you want to do Create React App, that would have been npx Create React App, and then the name of your project. Okay, it does the same thing, but it takes like 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes to get all set up. If it's not done yet, so we're going to cd into that folder, cd project 1. And the way I have it is just that it clones a repo, so you still need to install all the dependencies. So npm I. And it still doesn't take too long. And there you go. See, that's done. Okay, so we're good to go. Now, cool. Let me give you a quick tour. Actually, first let's just talk about the premise of React. So React is a front-end UI library. The whole point of React is not to build back-end servers or anything like that. It's to build front-end websites. The benefit of React is, let's say if you're familiar with jQuery, or using plain vanilla JavaScript DOM. What happens there is that you have to kind of code out every step. So let's say you have a div with a bunch of stuff, then the information changes, you'd have to empty that div, rebuild each DOM element, and you'd have to kind of code that out. What React does is that it links your UI to, and actually most modern frameworks, so if you're using Vue, Angular, React, Svelte, or Stencil, it kind of does all these things for you. All the same thing for you these days, and that is it links the data to your UI, also referred to as reactive data. And the benefit of this is when the data changes, your DOM just automatically updates. So wherever that data exists, it just updates. Okay, so instead of me having to code all this code to update my DOM, it'll just update. And I'll show you an example of this, but that's the reason why people like React. There are other things that React does, in the sense that it allows you to build components, which means instead of building your website as one big thing, it allows you to build your website out in smaller chunks called web components that are a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So like your slider would be one component, your nav bar would be one component, and that way you can just build it out in small pieces that are self-contained, that you can then maybe even reuse in other projects, which is nice. Okay, so yeah. So this particular template, and generally most React templates are going to follow a similar pattern, but the way you always want to kind of look at this is you want to look at your package JSON first. You want to see what kind of, so these are the dependencies I'm using. Instead of Webpack or Rollup, I'm using a bundler called Parcel. Doesn't really particularly matter for your purposes that you know the difference between Webpack, Parcel, and Rollup, but just so you know. And that's why these are my scripts. So these are the scripts, the commands you can run to get the server started. Okay, so if you ever need to change what port the development server is on, you would just change that right there. So what this just runs the parcel command on the index.html. So it's just going to read this index.html. It's going to pick up on this script tag and then start building out your project. That's kind of how this works. It's going to open up the dev server on port 3000, and it's automatically going to open up the browser for you. That's what this command means. Now when you're done with your project, you'll build it, and you're going to hit parcel. Well, you just run this build command, which will do parcel build, which means it's going to build the project, build the final version of it, which will create like a dist, D-I-S-T folder in here, and that's sort of your final version that you'll deploy, and again, the index.html. So that's what these two commands are for. Generally, never touch this. You don't need to. And you don't need to touch the index.html, unless you want to change like the title. Okay, so we'll just change the title. Let's call this our great test React app. But otherwise, you don't really need to change anything in here. Maybe you put in a link tag if you want to bring like Bootstrap or Materialize or something. I'm not going to worry about that now. And I'm not going to be focusing on styling either. The purpose of this is just to kind of understand the basics of the mechanics of React. Okay, but basically what happens is this is it. This is your index.html. This really doesn't need to be touched, because it all works through here. The way React works is that it's going to inject all your code, your HTML and CSS, via this div. So we're going to have this div that has an ID called app, and we're going to use that as sort of our injection point. We're going to inject all of our website in there. So you literally create all of your website in JavaScript. That's how this works. And then basically we inject it through our script, which is app.js. So that's our next stop. We're going to go to app.js. And then here in app.js, we import two libraries that were in the package JSON, so that you've downloaded them by hitting npmi. And since we're using Parcel, you can use ES6 import syntax. Okay, so instead of using like require this, you can use this syntax, which is actually processed when you hit build. So you can do import. It works just like require. So so think of this as saying like const react equals require react. That's pretty much how that reads. Okay, except it's just a bit easier to understand. Okay, so we're importing these two libraries, importing React and React DOM. That's what makes React work. The only one basically what React does, this is your main React library that does all the React stuff. We'll go in a moment, and React DOM is what we use to inject your website into the HTML file. So that's these two lines of code right here. So with these two lines of code here, what we're doing is we're selecting that app component. So that component called app that was in the HTML, I just grabbed it, put it in this variable called target, and then this function here just says, hey, when you run this, inject this app component, that's what we're building here, inject that whatever element of the HTML that this has. So it's going to take whatever this has and inject it into here. Okay, so notice it's nothing really there, but if I type in npm run dev and start running our dev server, now you see there's this. It's like, wait, that wasn't in the HTML. Where was that coming from? Well, let's take a look. In our app, my app component, in the template, we see three things. Okay, so the way this reads, so we see a component, another component that I brought in, I bought this in just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a template structure. Header, so you can put all your header, top of your page code in there, all your bottom of your page in the footer component. I bring them in here, and the cool thing about it is that React uses what's called JSX. JSX allows you to write components in the same way you kind of write your HTML. Okay, so essentially you're writing HTML in your JavaScript. Okay, so any component I make, I get to write it like this: header, footer, and then I can also just write normal HTML. Okay, but let me rebuild this so that way you can see how this works. So I'm going to just delete this component, which is going to make this disappear. See, that disappears. Okay. Now, in this particular series of videos, I'm only going to do functional components, meaning creating components with functions. Originally, when React was created, functional components were really limited, so everyone created class components. A few years ago, they created a feature called hooks that basically put them on par with each other. So you could do the same thing with both, just slightly different ways of doing it. So a lot of modern code is done in functions, and that's what I'm going to be teaching this video. It is worth learning class components because there's still a lot of developers that use it. There's still a lot of old code that has a lot of class components. The idea is the same, the syntax is a little bit different. It requires a better understanding of sort of how classes work in JavaScript. I think functions are just, the function style is just a bit simpler, cleaner, and a great place to start learning the basic concepts without being clouded by words like constructor and worrying about things like binding the this keyword. You just don't have to worry about these other issues that the function style kind of cleans up for you. Okay, so to create a component, you're just going to do, you just create a variable. So I'm going to do const app equals arrow function, and you always have to pass in a variable called an props. Okay, props stands for properties. We'll get to that. Okay, then this is just an arrow function. Okay, so literally up to this point, all we've done is create an arrow function. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'll create a variable. Basically, you can do whatever you want in this function. So I'm going to just say const my title equals my cool React test website. So I have this variable. Now, what React is going to render as HTML at the end of the day is whatever this function returns. And this function has to return something called JSX. JSX is a very special syntax for writing HTML and JavaScript that was developed by Facebook that has to be kind of rendered by React. So only you have to have a React set up for it to be able to read the JSX. That's what this Babel thing is for. Okay, Babel is a transpile that transpiles sort of very cutting edge JavaScript into normal JavaScript. So essentially, when you run the build command, Babel is going to take all your JSX and translate it to sort of more technical React code, which no one does. So because everyone just has Babel do it, because JSX just makes it so much easier. So basically, what you do is at the end of your function, you want to do your HTML for this particular component. You're going to do return. You're going to do a set of parentheses. That's kind of how JSX is always kind of surrounded by parentheses. So I'm going to return. Now, probably a good habit to have out of the box. What happens is that JSX has a bunch of different rules in it. One rule is that all components can only have one root tag. So the easy way to never have to really worry about that rule is just use a feature called fragments, where you just put an empty tag. Okay? So see, I just put an empty tag and an empty closing tag. And what happens is that React will be like, oh, that's the parent tag. Okay? So now you can just put whatever HTML you want in here, and you don't have to worry about it giving you any weird error saying, hey, there's too many parent elements. Okay? Meaning I couldn't put like a div next to a div. I can put a div inside of a div, not a div next to a div, without the fragment. So again, the fragment just makes it where you don't have to worry about this problem. So I'm just going to do h1. And another cool thing you can do with React is that it has built-in interpolation. So I can just do this. I can put a curly bracket, my title, and it's going to stick that variable right there. So now watch what happens when I flip back to my code. My cool React test website. So I can just, it'll always just show that variable. Okay? Neat. Now, even better, let's do this. Props. Okay, props is an object. Okay, let's talk about props. Props is an object that gets passed in based on when you invoke the component. So here I invoke the app component, right? I could actually pass in properties that I want to pass into the function. So let's say I want to pass in, I want to pass in my title equals hello. So now what I'm going to do is instead of my title equaling my cool React test website, I'm going to say it's going to equal props.mytitle. Because anything you pass in like this, so you see this pattern here where I kind of pass it in like an HTML property. That's why they call it props, because it gets passed in like that. That's going to get passed into props, and then my title's going to equal props my title, so my title should change to hello. So that's the cool thing. I can pass information from one component to the next through props. So props is a tool for passing, because it's always components inside components. So any components that are children of this component, I can pass information to. So app can pass information down. Everything in React is downward flowing information. Okay, so that's neat. And I can do as many as I want. So I can be like cheese equals Gouda. Okay, and then if I do that, you can be like const cheese equals, and you don't have to do this. You can just actually just put props cheese. Is just I find this easier, it looks nicer, and I'll even show you how to simplify it with destructuring in a second. And then I'll just do an H2, and we'll just stick cheese in there. Okay, hello Gouda. Okay. And all I'm doing is just interpolating these variables, and I can just change them right here. Okay, this makes components really reusable because you can just inject via props different information and it appears differently. Okay, which is really nice. But see how this, if I keep doing this to clean up my code, it's going to take up a lot of lines if I have a lot of props. That's where destructuring comes really useful. So watch this. If I wanted to, so a typical pattern you'll see is this. I'll do my title. Okay, my title cheese equals props. So that way I destructure all those properties out of props in one line instead of two. Okay, so that's a destructuring is a good habit to have. I do have several videos on destructuring. Just look up Alex Merced destructuring, and you will learn anything you'd ever want to know about destructuring. Okay, I mean, if I want to take it even a step further, I could just destructure it from the parameter list. I could just do this, and this would also work. Okay, that just means instead of creating a props object, I'm just immediately destructuring it from the get-go. That might be a little bit harder on the eyes. So it's probably easier just to destructure it this way, so that way you get used to this whole props pattern. Cool. Neat. Okay, so again, you can import another component. So again, we created a header component. I have that out of the box in this template. So header. Now, components always have to be self-closing, so you have to make sure that you put a little thing like that. I mean, not always, but you only can cover so much in one video. Okay, neat. Okay, so now we've injected those components, and those components are here. And if you wanted to edit those components, just go inside the components folder, and there's the footer. And for creating a new component, I created a little template.js file. You can literally just copy and paste this template.js, stick it on, paste it into here, make a copy of the file to create any future components you want to make. So that way you don't have to. So basically for a component, and actually you don't even need this React DOM line. You don't need React. You only really need React DOM in that main app.js. I'm going to take that out. Okay, so you can take that line out if you want. it's not being used in any of these files. You really just need to import React, and then what I'm doing is I'm just instead of creating a named function and then exporting it, I'm just exporting the straight up function definition, that is the component. Okay? So you can alter this if you want, but that gives you a nice place to start. Okay? And you can start building out those components there. But let me just show you what's called state. So let me go back to my app.js. Let's create an H3. Now let's create a new variable. So now you know props. Props is information that's passed into the component. But sometimes you need information that reacts, that it changes, and the screen updates. Okay. The way you create what's called state, and you can create as many of these as you want in one component. That's the beauty of function components. In class components, you have to do this in one big object. Here, you can just make a lot of little things. So let's say const Alex. And actually, no, const, you have to destructure this. So this is array destructuring. So you're going to put square brackets. And we're going to say the name of your variable. I'll just call it state, just to make it so you guys understand this whole state pattern. And then set state. So essentially, state is the variable that your UI is going to respond to. So whenever this variable changes, your UI will update. But in order to trigger that, you have to change it with this function. So this function, when it's used, will change your state and then trigger the rebuild of your website. And you have to use this function to build it. So react.useState, and then you put in the original value of the variable here. So we're going to put Alex, so it's going to be name Alex Merced. And even though I'm 35 at the moment, we'll just kind of de-age me for real quick. Okay, so this object is the value of state. Okay, so whatever this object here is now the value of state. And then this function returns two things: the state variable, state, and it also returns a function for changing it. Cool. So that is that. So now let's actually put this into our code. Okay. So we'll say state dot name, which should be Alex Merced, and then H4 state state.age goes there. Save. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so there's the two variables, Alex Merced 34. Wonderful. So far, that just seems like any other variable. Seems like these variables here. Like, okay, that's exciting. But here's what I need to do. I need to create a way to change it. So I'm just going to create a button. Okay, button, click me. Okay. So creating an event for that button, it's going to be the same as anywhere. You just do const click handler, just name of the function, equals, and you can pass in the event object, so that none of that changes. And generally, always use arrow functions in React. You'll save yourself a lot of heartache if you avoid using other syntax for functions. Okay, click handler. All I really want to do is update state. So basically what I'll do is I'm going to set state, which means I'm going to update this particular variable state, and then in parentheses I pass in the new state. And all I want to do is this. I'm not going to change the name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically say, hey, it's worth the value of the old state. So that's what this does. ... says bring back the old state, then do comma, and then change anything you're going to change. So all I'm going to change is the age. So I'm going to just say change age equals state.age plus plus. So it equals the current age plus 1. Okay. The reason is that your state may be an object with like 100 properties. You're not going to rewrite all 100 properties. Doing this just says, okay, everything that's currently there, and then plus anything that's after that. Okay, so this will originally put the original name and age in there, but then you override the age by putting the age again. And there you go, I've updated it. And Yeah, that should do it. Now I just have to make the button actually run this function when it clicks. So here's another React JSX rule. It's the JSX thing. So in HTML, you could just write onClick equals whatever. In JSX, it has to be onClick. It has to be camel case. So all those original HTML properties have to be camel case now. So keep that in mind. Okay, so onClick equals onClick equals, and then you interpolate the function. So click handler. Okay. So now when I click on this, it's going to run that click handler. So here's my button. If I click it, oh, I did something wrong. Let's take a look at my tools. I usually get good warnings. Let me think here. On click handler. I click the button. It should set the state to age plus 35. Let's see here. You read my syntax very carefully. Age, set state, click handler. Let's see if I just set it to set 35. Set age to 35, just to keep it simple. Let me refresh the page. Now I'm going to click here. That time it worked. Good. Okay, so you see what it did there? I changed the state and it automatically updated the screen. If this was jQuery, I would have to go add one to the variable, then clear out the H1's inner text, then reset the text to 35. It would have been more steps. Okay, with this is pretty simple, so like with jQuery that wouldn't have been that big a deal. But when you're talking about like lots of changes going on at any particular point, this kind of simplifies a lot of that when you start doing much more complicated UIs. So basic idea is whenever you use this set state function, okay, any state that's in that particular variable is going to update. Okay, I could create normal variables. I could create like const myvar, whatever. But when those changed, it will not update the UI. Only state updates. So props are variables coming into my component. States are variables inside my component that when they update, they change my UI. My component rebuilds itself. Okie dokie. My title sheet. Other things I want to show you is using classes. So I do in this template, I do have a CSS style sheet, so you can just do all your styling in that CSS style sheet. But to put classes on things, again, rules of JSX, you have to put not class. If you do class equals whatever, it's going to get confused because classes are a reserved word in JavaScript. So what you have to do is you have to do class name. So we'll say class name button. And then I go to I'm going to go to header template. No, I want to go with CSS. No, CSS in here. Let's style this button. Dot button. Hello. Color white. Background color. Let's do it firebrick. And let's do padding 10 pixels. And let's see how that looks. And see, it styled the button. Okay, it styled the button. Whoop-de-doo. Okay. So that's the basics of React. Again, you put stuff in the JSX that's going to render to the HTML. You can pass in props. So I could pass in. So like again, like I did here, I can pass in props. I can create state that'll update my UI when it updates. I can create. So again, I don't have to do all of my code here. I can create separate components and then bring them in into smaller pieces. And yeah, those are the basics. There's a lot more to React. From there on, you guys can go check out the rest of my React playlists on YouTube to understand further. But this should give you. I would just play with this first. Skip this template. Practice making components. Practice passing props in. Practice using state. And get comfortable with that. Otherwise, you can just do anything JavaScript wise. Like, basically, it's just JavaScript in HTML. So you want to go make an API call, use fetch. Just create a function that goes and fetches the data, or just normal stuff that you would do normally. Forms get a little complicated. Okay, let's just do a little small form, and then I'll end this video. So generally, create a separate piece of state for the form. So what I usually do is I'll create a thing called form data, and then the function set form data. Okay, equals react.useState, and then you're going to pass in a property for each form field. So we're just going to have name. Okay, name. So we'll say name is this, age is 0. Okay, so you just have a default there. Okay, and then we'll just create a form. So we'll just say input type equals text, and then what you have to do is there's the form field, and then we just have the button, another button. Okay, submit. We'll come back to the button. Although I might as well just give the same styling class name equals button. Okay, the form is not going to do anything for me right now. First, what I need to do is bind the value to the state. So we're going to say value equals form data, and you have to actually use the curly brackets for this. Form data dot name, because this is going to be the input to text input for the name. The name of the field is called name, just because we will. And then we have to do one other piece, but first let's do that. And then I need to create an input for the age, so type equals number, and that we're going to bind that to form data dot age, and then we'll just call this name equals age, even though I won't really need that right now, but it's there. Okay, cool. So now if I go back to the website, let's take a look. This everything disappears as Charlie and error. So you see it says form dama. That means I misspelled form data. So let's go take a look for that. Form, yeah, there we go. Form data. Okay, so usually if stuff is not working, please do read your console. React is really good at giving you errors telling you how you screwed up. Okay, failed prop type. You provided a value prop to a form field without an on-change handler. Okay, yeah, it's going to give you that error because we haven't fixed that problem yet. Okay. Now see, like, it put it all in one line, so let me go put this in a block. So I'm just going to put this form in a div. There we go. There we go. Cool. So just that way it breaks onto the next line. But now if I try to type in this box, it won't let me. Why? Because I bound the value. So see, the value is worth whatever formData.name is. What's formData.name? Nothing. So every time I type into it, it immediately changes it back to nothing. So it's stuck. So if I want to use the form, I need to change the state that it's bound to at the same time. So that's why we have to create this handle change function. And you can always pretty much use the same function. Const handle change equals, again, props. Oh, actually, no, it's going to take an event. This is an event handler. Equals And the way this works is you're just going to do props. I mean, we're going to do set form data, so because we're updating the form data state, we're updating that particular thing. And again, we always just start off with the full object, so dot 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 form data. So saying, hey, keep everything that's already in form data, except let's change this. But we don't know which one you're typing. We don't know if you're typing in name or age. So the easiest way to do this is why the name property is important, because you want the name to match the property name. Okay, because watch what we're going to do. I'm going to grab the event, the target of the event, which means the form. Okay, event dot target dot name. Okay, event dot target dot name. So that'll equal name. So when I type in the name form field, that's going to be name. So this tells JavaScript that we're updating the name property. Because again, you can identify which property in an object you're updating using square brackets. That's a thing you can do. But what value do I want it to make it? I want it to make it worth event.target.value. So whatever you typed in that second. So that way it's literally, the minute I type A, it updates my form data to include A. Okay, so that literally just updates it on the fly. And then we just have to make sure that our forms have that function. So we just say on change equals handle change. So that way that event gets run every time we type in the form. On change equals handle change. Cool. So now I can type in the form. Okay, and if I have what's called the React Dev Tools, it's a Chrome extension, which is this one right here, components. And I can now look inside the app component and I can see that, look, the state of, this is the form data state. I can see that it changed to, and if I keep typing it, if I start changing the numbers, see, it's the state's updating. Okay, you can see that right there. It's updating. So if we say that the person is Bob Jones, who's 55 years old, see, it updates. The state is updating. Cool. So now we just need to make something happen when we hit the submit button. Okay, so this becomes a bit easier. Okay, now I can just create another click handler. So we'll say const form click handler, since I already used click handler. And I'm going to say equals an event. And all this is going to do is just take the normal state, the state that has Alex34, okay, and we're going to just set that to equal whatever was in the form. So that's going to just equal dot 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 form data. Okay, cool. So now I can change who's the person. Save. Well, it automatically saves because I have it on autosave. So let's see here. So now let's watch what happens. Bob Jones, 55. I hit submit. That didn't do what I wanted to do. So see, the state did not update, so my screen did not update. So let me just take a look at that function again. Set state. Oh, I didn't put the actual handler on the button. Okay. On click equals form click handler. Okay. Cool. So let's try this again. Bob Jones, 55. I hit submit, and see, I automatically change. And see, I didn't have to do, all I did was change the variables using set state. It updates the UI. I didn't have to sit there and say, okay, you know, grab this element, dot text is this, you know, I didn't have to go in there and do all this magic to update it. It just does it for me. That's what React does. It just binds your UI to your data and updates your UI as your data changes. Okie dokie. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. That's how a form is set up. Okay, one more quick thing. Okay, let's say that and you see a lot of logic ends up starting being popped up here before your JSX. Your components get kind of complicated after a while. So comments are not a bad idea to organize this. You know, probably would, you know, if I want to organize this, I probably should do something like this. You know, state. So then I can move all my state variables up there. Control X. We'll call this one props and other variables. So basically other non-state variables to separate that stuff that's not reactive, doesn't update my UI when it changes, from my state. So let's just organize this a little bit better. Okay, I do want that there. That's a piece of state. This is a piece of state. So I want all my state kind of defined in a clunk. Then we'll just say all my functions. Okay, so you see that's just, now we're starting to get to a point where it's a little bit more organized. Okay, so that might not be a bad idea, to organize your components in such a manner so that way it's easier to keep track of what's where. Okay, so I'm just going to add a quick array variable. So const my r equals the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's say I want to list this as a bulleted list. So let me go back all the way over here. I'm going to create a UL. Okay. And then here's how you would treat an array. So you do curly brackets, and then I'm going to take my R, the array we created, dot map. Dot map. We'll just say each item is a number, so we'll just say num. You pass in the callback. And the thing is, you just want it to return JSX. So actually, I wouldn't even use curly brackets, because you can just return the JSX implicitly. So just do a parentheses and type in some JSX. So for each number in the array, I just want it to return an LI with the number. So the way this reads is map over my array. So again, map is a function that loops over your array and returns a new value and creates an array of that new value. We're going to say that the value at each step of the array is called num, and then for each item in the array, we're returning a JSX element that's just an LI with that number inside of it. Okay? And there you go. So see, now I can build out big chunks of my UI really easy. See, so if I had a huge array with like hundreds of things, I would just do that logic and all of them would magically appear. So you see, yeah, it can be a lot of fun to play with. But right now, take these tools, take this video, practice these things a few times before you go any further. There's a lot more to learn, but this is, yeah, this is a pretty good starting space. So practice this, make some basic dummy websites before you start getting anything too crazy. So see you later.